The Sunday dinner tradition was the last unbroken thread connecting my world to my son's. Every week, he would drive out from Bridgeport to my quiet suburban home, the same home where he'd grown up, and I would make him a pot roast, just like my mother had made for my father. It was a ritual of consistency in a life that felt increasingly foreign. This particular Sunday, however, Brandon was different. The air around him crackled with a frantic, synthetic energy. He sat at my familiar oak dining table, a piece of furniture that had witnessed 40 years of family history, and spoke a language I could barely comprehend. He wasn't my son, the boy who loved comic books and building elaborate forts. He was a pitchman, a walking billboard for his own ambition. "It's about leveraging our core competencies to monetize the engagement funnel, Mom," he said, his fork listlessly pushing a roasted carrot around his plate. His eyes, which used to be so full of warmth, now held the manic gleam of someone running on fumes and caffeine. Velocity Prime Capital isn't just a marketing firm. We're paradigm shifters. We craft narratives that drive conversion. He said narratives, as if he'd invented the concept. My late husband, Lawrence, would have listened to this word salad with a patient, knowing smile before gently asking, "That's great, son, but do your clients pay their bills on time?" Lawrence was a master plumber, a man who built his life on the tangible realities of copper pipes, solid joints, and balanced ledgers. He understood that a business with no profit was just an expensive hobby. It was his steady, unglamorous work, and his even steadier, more brilliant investments in brick and mortar that had left me in this comfortable house, financially secure and independent. "So Velocity Prime is doing well then?" I asked, pouring him more iced tea, trying to anchor his lofty pronouncements to the ground. A flicker of something, was it fear, crossed his face before being instantly papered over with a confident smile. "We're beyond, well, Mom. We're poised for exponential scaling," he corrected, the jargon a shield against my simple question. "We're in the final stages of landing a massive account, a legacy beverage brand. They're a household name. This is the kind of deal that makes a company. But big fish require a big pond. They need to see financial stability. The overhead on my space in the mill quarter, it's a monster." He gestured vaguely, as if the monster was a real thing he wrestled with daily. He looked around my living room, his gaze sweeping over the family photos, the slightly worn armchair where Lawrence used to read the paper, the grandfather clock ticking its steady, unhurried rhythm. In his eyes, I saw not nostalgia but appraisal. He saw inventory, a resource yet to be tapped. The deep, primal love I had for him, the instinct to soothe his every worry, warred with a small, cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. "Well," I said, choosing the mother over the pragmatist, "you're the smartest boy I know. You'll make it work." He smiled, a flash of white teeth that didn't quite light up his tired eyes. He was here for the pot roast, but he was hungry for something more. He didn't wait for the next Sunday. He called on a Tuesday, his voice imbued with a manufactured solemnity, and asked if he could stop by to discuss a business matter. The request was so formal, so unlike him, that the knot of dread in my stomach tightened. He arrived just after dusk, wearing a dark suit that seemed to constrain his restless energy. He smelled of expensive cologne, an aggressive citrusy scent that felt alien in my home, which usually smelled of lemon polish and baking. He carried a black leather portfolio, which he placed on the dining table with the gravity of a diplomat presenting a treaty. He sat opposite me, in the same spot he'd occupied on Sunday, but this time he was all business. He opened the portfolio. The pages were thick and glossy, filled with aggressive, upward-swooping charts in garish colors, incomprehensible diagrams of workflow, and stock photos of absurdly happy people pointing at a whiteboard. It was designed to overwhelm, to impress with complexity rather than substance. "Judith," he began, calling me by my first name, a tactic he must have read in a book about negotiation. It set my teeth on edge. As I said, Velocity Prime is at an inflection point. The beverage account is ours to lose, but they have a capitalization clause in their vendor contract. They need to see that we have the reserves to handle a nationwide rollout. It's a formality, but a necessary one. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The banks, Mom. They're obsolete. They don't get it. They move too slow. They want 3 years of profit history, personal guarantees on everything. They don't invest in vision, they only invest in hindsight. The silence that followed was heavy with his unspoken question. He was the bank's rejection, and I was to be his solution. "Brandon, what exactly are you asking me for?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, though I already knew. "I'm not asking for a handout," he said quickly, his voice as smooth as cream. "I'm offering you an opportunity, a chance to be my partner. The money you and Dad set aside, that nest egg. It's safe in that savings account, sure, but it's sleeping. It's not working for you. Let me put it to work. Let me give you a real return on your faith in me." And then he named the sum, $150,000. The sound of the number sucked the air from the room. It was the heart of the savings Lawrence and I had spent a lifetime building. It was the emergency fund, the rainy day fund, the God forbid fund. "Brandon, that's everything," I managed to say, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. "I know," he said, his expression a perfect performance of sincerity. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. It was cool to the touch. "And I will guard it with my life. This is a bridge loan, pure and simple. I'll have it back to you in 18 months, with 20% interest. I've drawn up a promissory note and everything." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was printed on bright white copy paper, full of impressive-sounding clauses that a moment's scrutiny revealed were vague and unenforceable. He was selling me a story, a fiction, but he was my son, my only child. In his desperate, feverish eyes, I still saw the flicker of the little boy who believed he could build empires from Lego bricks. And so, I chose to believe in the fiction. "Okay, Brandon," I heard myself say. "Okay." A wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over his face. It was the most honest emotion I'd seen from him all night. The next morning, I drove my Buick to the Bridgeport Federal Credit Union. The car, a sturdy, reliable sedan Lawrence had bought for me years ago, felt like a loyal old friend accompanying me on a grim errand. The credit union was a fortress of quiet dignity, all polished granite and brass fixtures, a place that embodied the stability I was about to shatter. Diane, a teller who had watched my own son grow up through the photos I shared, greeted me with her usual warmth. "Morning, Judith. Just a simple deposit today?" Her smile was so genuine it felt like a small knife twisting in my gut. "No, Diane, not today," I said, my voice thin and reedy. "I need to get a cashier's check." When I slid the withdrawal slip across the counter, her friendly expression dissolved. Her eyes widened, and she physically recoiled a little. "150,000? Judith, are you sure? I'll have to get Mr. Clayton." I sat in the visitor's chair opposite the branch manager's imposing mahogany desk, feeling like a schoolgirl awaiting a lecture. Mr. Clayton, a man whose pinstripe suit seemed fused to his skin, had known me and Lawrence for decades. He had helped us set up our first mortgage. He slid my account statement towards me, his finger resting on the balance. "Judith," he began, his tone a careful blend of professional duty and personal concern. "This is a very substantial withdrawal. It represents the majority of your liquid assets. Lawrence was always so meticulous about maintaining this safety net. Is everything all right? Forgive me for asking, but we see these sophisticated scams targeting seniors." His concern was a bitter pill. I had to lie to a man I respected to facilitate my own ruin. "Everything is perfectly fine, Jim," I said, forcing a brittle smile. "It's a family matter, an investment in my son's company." He nodded slowly, unconvinced but powerless. "It's your money, of course," he said, the disappointment clear in his voice. The process was agonizing. The signing of forms felt like a surrender. The loud mechanical screech of the dot matrix printer spitting out the cashier's check was the sound of my security being liquidated. Diane handed me the envelope with funereal gravity. I met Brandon in the vast, impersonal parking lot of a big box store on the edge of town, as he'd requested. He was pacing by his car, a sleek, dark sedan I knew he couldn't afford. He jogged over, snatched the envelope from my hand, and gave it a cursory glance before stuffing it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. I owe you big time. Gotta run. The future waits for no one." He gave my arm a quick, dismissive squeeze and was gone, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes. That was the last I heard from him. The first week of silence, I told myself he was immersed in his big deal. The second week, my calls went straight to his chipper, professional voicemail. Texts went unanswered, marked only by that cold, accusatory word, delivered. The following Sunday, the dining room table remained empty. The pot roast sat in its pan, a sad monument to a broken tradition. The silence was no longer a void. It was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating presence that filled every corner of my house with the chilling certainty that I had made a catastrophic mistake. After 4 weeks of being marinated in silence and dread, I couldn't take it anymore. The worried mother had been eroded away, leaving behind a creditor demanding an answer. I put on my coat, got in my car, and drove downtown to the Mill Quarter. The neighborhood was a caricature of urban renewal, all exposed brick, artisanal coffee shops, and young people in expensive sneakers striding with purpose. Brandon's building was the centerpiece, a beautifully restored warehouse with enormous windows. The lobby was minimalist and cold. A young woman with blue hair looked up from her phone, bored. "I'm Judith Sterling. I'm here to see Brandon Miles," I said, my voice more solid than I felt. She buzzed his office. A moment later, he appeared at the top of a floating steel staircase, and my heart sank. He looked like a ghost. His trendy clothes were rumpled, his face was ashen, and dark circles pooled beneath his eyes. He wasn't a CEO, he was a shipwreck survivor. He ushered me quickly into a glass-walled conference room, as if I were a contagion he needed to contain. The grand table was a wasteland of styrofoam containers and half-empty energy drink cans. Through the glass, the main office was a cavern of emptiness, with rows of vacant desks. Only 2 other people were present, hunched over their computers, radiating an aura of defeat. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice a low, angry hiss. "This is my place of business. You can't just drop in." The anger was a flimsy shield for the raw panic in his eyes. "I've called you every day for a month, Brandon," I said, my voice shaking with a month's worth of pent-up fear and frustration. "I thought something had happened to you. What's going on with the company? Did you land the beverage account?" He didn't answer right away. He collapsed into one of the sleek office chairs, which sighed under his weight. Then he let out a sound. It wasn't a chuckle or a giggle. It was a short, sharp, brittle bark of a laugh, the sound of a string snapping under too much tension. It was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. "The beverage account?" he echoed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Oh, that was never going to happen. They were just kicking the tires. They went with a global firm from New York weeks ago. It was a fantasy." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I felt lightheaded. "The money, Brandon," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "My money, the $150,000. He looked up at me then, and the mask of the dutiful son fell away completely, revealing the face of a petulant, cornered stranger. The look in his eyes was not one of sorrow or guilt. It was cold, dismissive annoyance. He looked at me as if I were a pesky fly he wanted to swat away. "Oh, that," he said with an airy, dismissive wave of his hand. He let out that terrible laugh again. "It's gone, Mom. It's gone." I stared at him, unable to process the words. "Gone where?" I stammered. "Where could it possibly be gone?" "Overhead," he said with a shrug, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Payroll for the staff you see out there. Back rent to the soulless corporation that owns this building. A deposit to a web developer who was threatening to sue. It was a Band-Aid, Mom. It just stopped the bleeding for a few weeks." He spoke of my life savings, the tangible result of his father's sweat, and my decades of careful household management, as if it were pocket change. Seeing the utter devastation on my face, he added the final crushing blow. "Look, it's just money. It comes, it goes. You'll be fine. You've still got the house, right?" In that moment, the boundless, unconditional love of a mother died, and something else, something cold and sharp and forged in the fire of his laughter, was born in its place. The drive home was a blur. I piloted the Buick on pure muscle memory, my mind a swirling vortex of his laughter and the callous phrase, "It's gone." When I stepped back into my quiet house, The silence I had once dreaded now felt like a judgment. The grief was a physical force, buckling my knees and sending me stumbling to the floral sofa he so disdained. I buried my face in a cushion and sobbed, a storm of grief not just for the money, but for the profound, bottomless betrayal. I wept for the son I had adored, who had been replaced by a man who could treat my security as his personal slush fund and then laugh about it. I cried until my body ached and my eyes were swollen shut, until all that was left was a hollow, echoing emptiness. He thought I was a relic, a sentimental old fool living in the past. He was right about one thing. I was living in the past, a past built by a much smarter man than he would ever be. As dusk filled the room with long, melancholy shadows, a new feeling began to crystallize in the void. Rage. It was not a hot, fiery rage, but a cold, clear, calculating fury. It was the kind of resolve Lawrence had possessed. He was a kind man, but he was nobody's fool. "Kindness is a choice, Judith," he used to say, "not an obligation, and you never owe it to those who treat you with contempt." I stood up, my movements no longer weak but deliberate. I walked to the spare bedroom, to the heavy oak roll-top desk that had been Lawrence's command center. I hadn't opened it in years, content to let our lawyer, Elias Thorne, handle the business side of the estate. But I knew its secrets. I rolled back the slatted wooden lid, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of old paper, leather, and cedar. My fingers, steady now, moved past folders labeled taxes, wills, and insurance, until they found the one I was looking for. The tab in Lawrence's neat, blocky handwriting read, J&L Assets, LLC. I lifted the heavy file onto the desk. Inside was the architecture of my salvation, the original deed, the articles of incorporation, the county tax records, Lawrence and Judith Assets, a simple limited liability company whose sole purpose was to own and manage a single asset, a 3-story commercial property in Bridgeport's burgeoning mill quarter. A building Lawrence had bought for a song during a recession, convinced its solid bones and prime location would one day be a gold mine. I methodically turned the pages until I came to the current lease agreement. Tenant, Velocity Prime Capital. Landlord, J&L Assets, LLC. The rent checks I knew were sent not to me, but to a third-party property management firm Lawrence had hired to create a professional buffer, a layer of anonymity. Brandon, in his arrogant rush to secure his trendy office, had signed the lease without a second thought, never once asking who J&L Assets was. The terrible irony was almost poetic. He had stolen my savings, money I had specifically earmarked to make the final balloon payment on the mortgage for that very building, to pay for his expenses, all while neglecting to pay rent to his own mother. He hadn't just lost the money, he had delivered it, late and incomplete, to the one person he believed he had swindled. The next morning, the sun rose on a different woman. The grieving mother was gone, replaced by the sole proprietor of J&L Assets, LLC. At 9 o'clock sharp, I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Thorne Law Group, how may I direct your call?" a crisp voice inquired. "Elias Thorne, please. It's Judith Sterling." Elias had been Lawrence's lawyer, then mine. He was a man of sharp suits and even sharper intellect, but beneath the legal polish was a deep well of old-fashioned integrity. "Judith, a pleasure to hear your voice, though experience tells me it's rarely just a chat," he said, his tone a friendly mix of warmth and professional readiness. "You are correct, Elias," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the morning air. I then recounted the entire sordid tale, from the Sunday pot roast to the Tuesday pitch, from the glossy portfolio to the worthless promissory note. I told him about the withdrawal, the month of agonizing silence, and finally, the confrontation and the cruel, dismissive laughter. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy and profound. When Elias finally spoke, all the friendly warmth had been burned out of his voice, replaced by a cold, controlled anger. "That ungrateful, parasitic— Judith, I am speechless. I am so profoundly sorry." "Don't be sorry, Elias," I said, my own voice steely. "Be my lawyer. I'm sitting at Lawrence's desk. I have the J&L Assets file open. I've been rereading the lease agreement for 1 Brandon Miles of Velocity Prime Capital." A beat of silence, and then a low whistle from Elias. "Of course. Lawrence. He was a chess player in a world of checkers. He always believed in firewalls. What's the situation? I called the property management firm an hour ago, I explained. Brandon is 2 months in arrears on his rent. They've sent 2 certified letters of default, both of which were ignored. He used my life savings to pay everyone except his landlord. He used my money to default on me. I could almost hear the legal tumblers clicking into place in Elias's mind. The lease is ironclad, Judith. Lawrence made sure of it. 3 months of non-payment is a material breach. We can file for an immediate writ of possession. The termination notice will come from the management company, on their letterhead. He'll think it's just the soulless corporation he mentioned. Your name will be nowhere near it. He'll have no idea who is lowering the boom until the very last moment. That's what I want, I said, feeling a grim, clean satisfaction. I want him to feel the full, impersonal weight of the consequences before he knows who delivered them. This is going to be a difficult, painful process for you, Judith, Elias cautioned. I looked at the photo of Lawrence on the desk, his kind, steady eyes smiling out at me. Elias, I replied, my voice unwavering. The difficult part was being a fool. This is just bookkeeping. 10 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed, Brandon. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, calming breath, and answered. The voice on the other end was not a voice, but a panicked squall. Mom, you will not believe the audacity. The nerve of these people! He shrieked, his voice cracking with pubescent fury. Some process server just came and slapped an eviction notice on my front door. An eviction! Can you believe it? I was seated in my armchair, a delicate china cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The warmth spread through my fingers. It was the feeling of control. An eviction notice, Brandon? That's terrible, I said, my voice a placid sea of calm. Are you having some trouble paying your rent? My serene tone was like gasoline on his fire. Trouble? Of course I'm having trouble. You know the situation. I'm barely holding on. But to just throw me out on the street? No negotiation, no warning. It's barbaric. It's from some soulless management company representing some faceless holding company. These corporate vultures are going to destroy me. Everything I've worked for is going to be gone. He was hyperventilating now, a whirlwind of righteous indignation and pathetic self-pity. He was the hero of his own story, beset by villains on all sides. That does sound awful, I sympathized, my voice smooth as silk. What's the name of this faceless holding company, dear? I don't know. Who cares? He spat. It's some ridiculous acronym. J&L Assets LLC or something. It's meaningless. What matters is that my dream is being murdered by a line of code on a balance sheet. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I placed my teacup carefully back in its saucer. The quiet click was the sound of a judge's gavel. It's not a ridiculous acronym, Brandon, I said softly, and it's not meaningless. A confused silence. What are you talking about? He asked, his rage giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. J&L Assets LLC, I said, speaking each letter with crisp, deliberate precision. Think about it, Brandon. Use that brilliant mind of yours. J&L. The silence that followed was vast and absolute. It was a silence so deep I could hear the hum of my own refrigerator. I could hear his sharp, ragged intake of breath through the phone. I pictured him standing amidst the ruins of his ambition, the eviction notice trembling in his hand, the letters on the page rearranging themselves in his mind into an unthinkable truth. J&L, he whispered, the sound a dying ember. Judith. And Lawrence. Yes, Brandon, I said, and my voice was no longer soft. It was as hard and unyielding as the granite of the bank. Judith and Lawrence Assets. Your father bought that building before you were in high school. It's my primary retirement asset. You weren't just my son taking my savings. You were a tenant in material breach of your lease. The money you laughed about, the money you said was gone, was the very money meant to secure ownership of the roof over your head. You stole from your landlord to illegally occupy her property. I let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. The eviction is proceeding. You have 30 days to vacate my premises. After all, I said, delivering the killing blow, it's just business. A choked, strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, came through the line. Then, it went dead. The next 30 days were punctuated by a series of voicemails from Brandon, each one a station on his path to ruin. They began with rage and threats of lawsuits, descended into desperate, rambling pleas, and finally dwindled into pathetic, whimpering apologies. I listened to none of them. I deleted them all. Elias and the property management firm handled the entire affair with cold, legal precision. True to his word, Elias found a new tenant before Brandon's abandoned office furniture was even hauled away. It was an architectural firm that specialized in historical preservation. They loved the building's character, its history. They signed a 5-year lease at a rate 15% higher than what Brandon had been paying. The irony was exquisite. My building would now be cared for by people who appreciated its legacy, a concept my own son had never been able to grasp. A week later, a large check arrived from the management company, the new tenant's first 3 months' rent and security deposit. I didn't cash it immediately. I took it to Lawrence's desk and laid it on top of the open J&L assets file. I looked from the check to the deed to the photo of my late husband. This was his true inheritance. Not just a building, not just an asset on a balance sheet. It was a fortress. It was a tool of self-preservation. It was the wisdom to protect oneself, even from those you love most. Brandon had seen my savings as a piggy bank to be smashed open. He never understood that its true power was not in the lump sum, but in the slow, steady, reliable security it was meant to provide, the same security the building itself now gave me. I lost my son that day in the glass conference room. A part of my heart will always carry the scar of that loss, but I found myself. I am not the foolish, sentimental old woman he saw. I am not a victim to be pitied or a resource to be plundered. I am Judith Sterling, the sole proprietor of a thriving commercial property. I am a landlord, and my assets, both financial and personal, are no longer available for hostile takeovers. My life is not for sale.